Today on Inside Utah Politics, an effort to save American-trained prosecutors in Afghanistan who are being hunted by the Taliban. How prosecutors from across the country are launching that effort from right here in Utah. Plus, the White House working to increase access to mental health services. A look at the initiative being rolled out.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Salt Lake County District Attorney Sim Gill, here to discuss an effort to save Afghan prosecutors being hunted by the Taliban. Great to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for the invite.
This is such an interesting topic, and there was a conference in Salt Lake City during the week that really addressed this. But first, let's get into the background. Talk to us about how this issue came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as part of our efforts in Afghanistan, our government with the Allied forces also helped train the Afghan Attorney General's office and helped create that with constitutional provisions, the idea of rule of law, the principles that we as public prosecutors rely upon, and due process, accountability, discretion, independence. And that was a paradigm shift for the building of democratic institutions there. And there are men and women who embraced that, and as a part of that, really helped out with that effort. And then when the fall of Afghanistan happened in 2021, these men and women were left behind. And they were men and women who were pivotal in prosecuting terrorism, prosecuting corruption, prosecuting violence against women, and all the different kinds of crimes that were being committed by the Taliban. So when the Taliban came in, they released some 60,000 prisoners and basically put all these men and women who were prosecutors on a hit list of retribution, and they've gone into hiding, and they are being targeted. Some 26 have been killed. There's multiple family members who have been tortured and killed as a result of that. And so the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, which is a national organization I'm a part of, we are having our major county meeting here, and the task force that was created to assist our fellow prosecutors who've been left behind.
Yeah, talk about that more from a colleague standpoint. You can, just hearing what you said, your heart goes out, and you can just imagine how terrible that must be. But to know what you do here every single day and how it's taken for granted in other parts of the country, but from a colleague standpoint, talk to me about how your heart goes out to those that are now in hiding.
Yeah, we had one colleague who has moved away, who was with the Afghan Attorney General's Association, who came and spoke at the conference that we had at the press conference. When you do the work as a prosecutor in America, you follow the law. It can be complicated, but justice is not complicated. It may be nuanced, but it's about doing the right thing for the right reason without inserting politics into it. And it is that core principle that these men and women also embraced. And while we may get people who are angry at us, we don't get the same kind of death threats, which are existential. So there was a story that I mentioned at the press conference. There was a rarity of a woman prosecutor who was on the hit list, and they went looking for her. They couldn't find her, but her father answered the door, and he was killed. There is another one who they were looking for the one prosecutor, and his brother showed up, and they killed the brother. And even as we were talking about this for our press conference for this national launch of this campaign, in this last week, 2 more prosecutors have been killed. And so we take for granted the work that we do without fear to do the right thing. And here are men and women who embrace that same thing as fellow prosecutors. So our heart goes out to them as colleagues, but more importantly, our heart also goes out to them as fellow human beings who are being basically targeted for doing the right thing.
What does that say about their character, that they're willing to put their lives on the line for a cause they thought was just?
Yeah, it's remarkable. It takes remarkable courage. At the press conference I talked, I grew up in that part of the world, in that region. I'm from northern India. And those systems can be very calcified, and they can be very rigid. And as we were a part of that democracy and democratic institutions building, these men and women took the risk to be part of that change, and they embraced it fully. And by taking that risk, they put themselves in direct and harm's way, and it's unimaginable for us. But they bought into the idea of rule of law. They bought into the idea of transparency. And the dignity of human agency, and how critical they know it was for the institution that are dependent on those democratic principles. So they bought in full force. As a result, there were 6,000 staff and family members who were left behind, and there are some 1,500 still that are just in hiding, basically day-to-day surviving because they're on a list being hunted down.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit more, because that's what this is all about. Yeah. So the national prosecutors coming together to raise money to try to help these people get out of Afghanistan. Talk about the fundraiser, and is it something that me and other members of the public can contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a collaboration with non-government organizations. One of the things to keep in mind, because these prosecutors were not directly employed by the U.S. government, they do not qualify for this specialized visa. So one of the things that we're agitating for is to change those rules, because they need to also have this access to the visa so they can escape. The other part of it is that all these different non-government organizations that have come together, we're working with them, and the goal here is to raise $15 million with these NGOs who can facilitate their escape. So Germany has taken people, Spain has taken people, Portugal has taken people. The process is slowed down for us, so it's going to be direct funding for that. The Association of Prosecuting Attorneys have set up this nonprofit 501c. 100% of that money is going to go towards working, facilitating that change. It is travel money, it's visa money, it's subsistence money to help these men and women be able to escape.
We talked a little bit about the conference that was being hosted here in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
At least some of it I know right at your office.
Yeah.
Talk about the significance of bringing prosecutors from across the country here to Salt Lake City and to really engage in this cause.
Yeah, so our office has been hosted the major county prosecutors meeting, and that brings some of the major metropolises and counties. There's about 30 to 40 of the biggest ones that are here. We're sharing ideas together, but more importantly, we're also talking about these important issues of how to serve our community. So it was our privilege as the Salt Lake County DA's office to host that, and it was also our privilege to help launch that national organization. And you asked earlier, so everybody can participate in this. If you go to the website apa-pfp.org, ordinary citizens can donate to that, large corporations can donate to that, and everybody can be a part of this process and bringing these men and women home.
Okay, that's awesome. Say that website one more time,
Sure,
please.
it's apa-pfp.org.
Okay, all right, and then we can probably find that on Google, and I'll provide a link to that on our web story as well, if anyone is interested in finding that. Fascinating conversation. Wish you all the best, because it's such a good cause. Thanks so much for being here and sharing that experience with us.
Thank you for drawing attention to that.
You bet. All right, still to come, Utah Senator Mitt Romney calling on Republican presidential candidates to do their part to keep former President Donald Trump from getting the party nomination. Our panel will weigh in on that a little bit later. But first, two senators teaming up to ban lawmakers and their families from trading stocks. Why they say it's necessary to do that after the break. The White House says health insurance companies are ignoring federal laws when it comes to covering mental health treatments. President Biden proposing new rules aimed at fixing that problem. Washington correspondent Alexander Limon reports.
I don't know what the difference between breaking your arm and having a mental breakdown is.
President Biden announced proposed new rules to ensure health insurance companies cover mental health care the way the law requires.
Patients are often forced to seek out-of-network care at significantly higher cost if they can find it.
Michigan Senator Debbie Stabenow agrees that insurance companies need to cover mental illness like any other illness.
No extra barriers, no extra pre-authorizations. They're not supposed to be in a situation where they cover fewer visits if it's mental health.
The White House says health insurance companies are skirting the rules and indirectly blocking access to mental health care by imposing hurdles like excessive paperwork and a limited number of in-network providers. The new rules, if finalized, will require insurers to prove they're covering access to mental health care providers and to reimburse those providers at appropriate rates. The new rules will also close a loophole and include mental health coverage for state and local government employee health plans.
Now we're making it clear. They have to follow the law as well.
Stabenow says the new rules will have a significant impact.
1 out of 5 people prior to COVID were people that would have a mental illness in their lifetime. Now it's even higher.
President Biden says right now about half of all adults and 70% of children with mental illness go untreated. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are coming together to try and ban members of Congress from trading stocks. They argue the practice itself creates a conflict of interest. Washington correspondent Raquel Martin has more from Capitol Hill.
Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Republican Senator Josh Hawley are teaming up to ban stock trading at the highest levels of the federal government.
Members of Congress and senior executive branch officials should be serving the American people, not lining their pockets.
It is way overdue.
The bill would only allow officials and their family members to own broad-based mutual funds. Hawley says lawmakers and other federal officials have early access to valuable information that might affect stock prices.
It may not technically be insider trading, but it's still an incredible advantage to get the kind of information and briefings that members of Congress get and then be able to turn around and make millions of dollars on that.
Senator Gillibrand helped pass the 2012 Stock Act. It requires members of Congress to publicly disclose their stock holdings, but she says members are not following the rules.
An astounding 1 in 7 violated the Stock Act last Congress. It's become clear that we need to go even further and to ban them.
Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth is one of more than 24 lawmakers from the Senate and House endorsing a similar bill.
We have to set the standard for the American people so that they can have trust.
Opponents argue an outright ban could discourage middle-class Americans from seeking public office. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has endorsed new trading restrictions, but has yet to bring it up for a vote. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
Coming up, Utah Senator Mitt Romney weighing in on the race for the White House with a request for Republican candidates. Our panel weighs in after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Utah GOP Chair Thomas Wright and former Democratic State Senator Scott Howell. Gentlemen, great to have both of you back on the show.
Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Let's get right into a Wall Street Journal op-ed we saw from our own Utah Senator Mitt Romney during the week, essentially calling on the GOP field for president and saying, look, if it comes to a certain point and you're not making traction, you got to get out of this race. And the goal there is to, in Romney's eyes, is to make sure that former President Donald Trump does not get the nomination again. So, Thomas, first off, let's dig into plurality and the role it plays in this race. Common consensus seems to be that plurality does benefit the former president.
In this case, it absolutely does. And this is the great part about having a primary, is we get to see all the candidates come forward, make their case to the voters. And Mitt Romney has every right to come out. Senator Romney has every right to come out and say what he thinks and to lobby people to support the way that he wants to see it. But the beauty of this is we get to hear all the candidates and we get to see which one rises to the top. You know, Glenn, I'm not a fan of plurality. I think in the state of Utah and in presidential politics, it's one of the biggest challenges we have. It doesn't create good results, and we need to have runoff elections to make sure that winners win with a majority of the vote.
Yeah, we see in those instances that the winning candidate walks away with somewhere in the 30s percent of the vote. Scott, let's bring you in on this because this is something we saw from a strategy standpoint back in 2020 with the Democrats. Bernie Sanders was really gaining some ground, and we saw Pete Buttigieg and Senator Klobuchar saying, look, we need to back out of this race. We don't have what now President Biden has, so let's get out of this race and support him so that Bernie does not become the nominee. How did that all play out, and could that potentially work in this case as well?
Well, for me, it played out great. That's exactly what I like it. And Thomas and I might disagree on that, but you know, when I look at what could have been the possibility to have a Bernie in there or someone else of that ilk, I think that President Biden was the right choice, and it really worked for us. And while he only had a percentage of that, in that case, it was something that really made sense. I thought Senator Romney's op-ed was brilliant. It was really good. He pointed out in so many ways what candidates do. There's a lot of candidates that get into this to hang on. And then after they get done, you can think of Rick Santorum, Rubio, and those people who are running for president. They got big speaking engagements after that. They got big deals. So you always have your staff that keeps saying, hey, guess what, Thomas? Hang in this race. Even though you're 22 points behind, you should hang in on the race. And those are probably the do-getters who are in it for the wrong reason.
Talk about that, Thomas. There's also some ego that comes into play when you're dealing with a situation like this. Do you see a situation where a majority of those candidates in the Republican field will be willing to get out and potentially back the one who has the best chance against the former president?
Well, Senator Romney did make a compelling case. I don't know if it will have an impact on those candidates. Look, it's hard when you have supporters and people that back your campaign that are out working hard. You want to see it through. You want to see it through to the end. I've been in a race where, I was unfortunately not the winner, and I wanted to show my kids that you stay in it till the end. You accept the result. You work hard until the end, and so there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Strategically, obviously, if you want to see one person win, in this case, the case that Senator Romney is making is one to defeat former President Trump. But I do think plurality creates a lot of problems, and there ought to be a system where people can run, give it their best, but ultimately there needs to be a runoff where somebody obtains a simple majority, and we need to work toward that in presidential politics, and we absolutely need to fix that in the state of Utah.
Yeah. Scott, talk about this dynamic that we've seen play out over years now between our Senator Mitt Romney and former President Donald Trump. They've been at odds quite a bit over the years. Well, how does this kind of play into that effect as well?
Well, they're not inviting each other to their birthday parties. Let me just say that. It's really interesting to see. And I thought Mitt in the op-ed was very clear on how he approached about the morality of President Trump. And the things that he talked about and how could he get elected. President Trump has been indicted 2 times. It sounds like there's going to be a 3rd one that's going to come out pretty soon. And I think when you look at that and some of the action that the former president has taken, I think Mitt Romney's on the side of morality. He's on the side of bringing out truth, and he wants candidates who have a moral code of conduct that we can all appreciate and support. So I applaud Senator Romney. And I think he did something that was very courageous. It was interesting. The most liberal Democrat in the state of Utah right now in the state Senate, Nate Bullen, tweeted out that Senator Romney had more courage than any Republican he's ever seen.
Okay, but let's dig into that, Thomas, because on the flip side of that, it has created some situations for the senator in the Republican Party. Some people that support the president that don't like what he's doing. So how does that potentially impact him with Utah Republicans, where he really needs to be strong?
Yeah, I love when Scott Howell, the Democrat, points out the most liberal Democrat agrees with the strategy in the Republican primary. That's good Sunday morning comedy. But no, really what this is about is everybody gets to speak up and speak their mind. That's what Senator Romney has done. He's earned the right to speak up and say what he thinks. And so have other people, people that support other candidates. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important here is we need to vet all the candidates, all the ideas. We need to have a vigorous debate. And then we're going to elect the person that we want to be the president of the United States. And most importantly, I see a lot of Republicans motivated, energized, and enthusiastic about defeating President Biden. This presidency of Joe Biden has been a complete disaster. and everybody knows that we can't continue on this road. They're questioning whether or not he can even continue himself, and we need to make a change in the executive branch, and that's what I like seeing. The Republican Party's energized, and everybody's coming out with their opinions, and that's the way it should be.
Okay, Scott, I'm going to give you real quick a second to respond to what Thomas just said about the Biden administration.
Well, of course, Thomas, my good friend, needs to take a shot there at the president. I think Joe Biden's done an admirable job. Has it been perfect? No. Has he made some mistakes? Absolutely. But for me, it's better than the alternative. That's all I can say. And when you look at it from that perspective, as someone who has a moral compass that is doing the right things, or trying to do the right things, I think that that's what we have to look at. Okay. And it's probably a challenge for any good Democrat or good Republican not to be able to speak, as Thomas says, speak about the good things that they've done versus the challenges they've had.
Okay. This is a pretty good segue into this last segment I want to get into. We've used up most of our time, but real quick, earlier this month, Governor Cox launching a Disagree Better initiative to start his term as chair of the National Governors Association. How can we disagree better? Let's talk about that real quick. Thomas, your thoughts on that?
Style in politics matters. We should disagree civilly. That's great. But we have so many big policy challenges in this country. I would rather see our elected officials focus on the heavy lifting that needs to be done on the policy side. We have grave challenges, and the Biden presidency has been a failure. Our border security is not there. The fentanyl crisis is killing family members all across this country. Our national debt is out of control. Inflation's barely getting under control. It's just the problems in our country are severe. And while I applaud focusing on style, to me, I'm going to look for people to vote for and to support that are serious about policy changes that are going to make an impact so that my kids can afford to buy housing. And I mean, the tax rate stays affordable. There's so many things that are going on. You can't just talk about style anymore. It has to have a little bit more substance than that.
Scott, your thoughts? Disagreeing better.
Disagreed, and it does matter. And I think you're seeing a good example of it. Thomas and I could sit down and have a rational conversation about the most important things in this country.
Which, by the way, has always been the goal of my show, I will point out.
Well, you've done a great job, Glenn, and you continue to do a good job. And Scott and I have gotten along very well.
I couldn't agree more. The national debt. Why can't we come together to that? Border control. And I'm going to blame both parties. I'm going to give equal shots at both parties. It is so stupid what they do. Instead of sitting down and having a comprehensive program that can benefit everyone, they sit there and fight. They put razor wire in water. They send people in a bus. That's just not good politics. Agree to disagree and do it civilly, but come together with an outcome. You have to have that objective of the outcome. When I was in the state Senate, we worked, Lane Beatty and I worked all the time when he was the president. We very seldom had something that was disagreeable that we would go out and make emotional, or we'd make it so it was a public scene. That's not the way you do politics.
Yeah, I mean, how about just a Congress that could adopt a budget? They haven't adopted a budget since Bill Clinton was president. Yeah. So, of course, both parties are to blame. I agree with you on that. But at the end of the day, yeah, we can talk about style and we can talk about disagreeing better, and that's important, and I believe in that, and I think most Americans do too. But I think at the end of the day, we have to find elected officials that have the courage to have the hard conversations and to make the hard choices, even if it costs them re-election, because we're kicking the can on too many issues. They're getting to be too intractable. They're impacting our lives too much, and style alone will not solve them.
We're out of time. We're going to have to end the conversation on that note. Gentlemen, always glad to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The municipal and special election primary is coming up. Ballots will start to go out the week of August 15th. Election day is Tuesday, September 5th, and the general election is Tuesday, November 21st. Make sure to connect with me on social media or through email. Let me know what's on your mind and what issues are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.